Hello and welcome to another episode. I am Brian, the Unskilled Commander. Appreciate you checking out the video. I hope you enjoy it. If you do, please hit the old subscribe button there, maybe some likes around the channel. Check out some of my other stuff. But this is Deck Break It Down, where I take one of my decks, break it into its individual components, talk about what the theme of the deck was when I tried to build it and why I built it that way, call out some of the key cards in each section, and just give you an idea about how I went about building it. Today we are looking at Me the Immortal. It's a Doctor Who card. Again, I'm not actually a fan of Doctor Who, but I ended up being a fan of the cards because there's a lot of cool effects, a lot of cool legendary creatures that made for fun commanders, and some good interactions. Me the Immortal is a 3/3 that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, put your choice of a +1/+1 first strike, vigilance, or menace counter on Me the Immortal. Counters remain on Me as it moves to any other zone except your player's hand or the library. Meaning, as long as no one bounces it to your hand, or puts it, third from the top in your library, it keeps all of those counters. And you may cast it from the graveyard by discarding 2 cards in addition to paying its other costs. But it's a lot of fun because you can make her big by doing extra combat steps and doing things like that, putting +1/+1 counters on her through effects and creatures, and swing for commander damage. That's basically what I went for. There's hardly any creatures in the deck. I mean, not hardly, but there's not as many as most other decks. It's about her. It's about getting her as high as possible, swinging in for commander damage, and as I said, hopefully taking an extra combat step or two. There is one or two, well, it's just one extra turn card in here somewhere. That could be a theme to also try and do at some point, is to increase the number of extra turn cards in it, because it's by no stretch of the imagination a perfect deck, but it's built off of what I owned. I really have a lot of fun playing it. It does well. It doesn't always win. Most of my decks don't, but the point is it gets pretty scary. She can get up to like a 10/10 with vigilance and menace and its commander damage, and that's nothing to sneeze at. And higher than that, of course. So let's jump into the stats. First off, we have 36 lands, as I build all my decks with a minimum of 36 lands. It's really helped with the mana curve. I suggest if you're not running that many, try it in a couple decks. I think you're going to see the improvement. You don't get land screwed as much, or even flooded. Still flooded a little bit, but it's a lot better hitting the land drops. Just by going from my normal 33 up to a now new normal of 36 has helped the decks a lot. The only land that's worth calling out, of course, is the Rogue's Passage, because it makes your commander or any creature unblockable by paying 4 mana and tapping it. That's extremely key in a deck that's all about the commander damage. Next up, we have sorceries. There are 13 of them. Most of them are built around ramp spells because she has green, and card draw spells because of the blue. However, some of the key cards to call out would be about taking extra combat steps. We have Seize the Day. Untap target creature. After this main phase, there is an additional combat phase, followed by an additional main phase. And it has flashback, so you can play it from your graveyard. So theoretically, you can do it twice. So you could conceivably give her 3 combats in one turn. Then we also have Last Night Together. Choose 2 target creatures, untap them, put 2 +1/+1 counters on them. They gain vigilance, indestructible, and haste until end of turn. After this main phase, there is an additional combat phase. Only the chosen creatures can attack during that combat phase. Something I have run into is that she's the only creature on my side of the board when I'm able to play this, so you do have to give some counters to somebody else, because it doesn't say up to, it says 2 target creatures. However, giving someone else's creatures +2/+2 isn't that big of a deal if you get to swing your 10/10 commander with indestructible haste and vigilance and menace and stuff. Especially if you're able to just dump them on something tiny like a mana dork, a Lanowar Visionary or something that they had no intention of swinging with anyway. Moving on from there, we've got enchantments. There's only 7 of them, but they're focused around largely the combat and tricks like that. We've got Aggravated Assault, which is a good one that untap, you can pay 5 mana and untap all creatures you control. If it's the main phase, there's an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase, and you can only activate that as a sorcery. We have Simic Ascendancy that says you can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, which is great to put on her, but it also says when one or more counters are put on a creature, put that many on Simic Ascendancy, and at the beginning of your upkeep, if Simic Ascendancy has 20 or more counters on it, you win the game. So it's a very obvious but, nice little sub-win con within the deck, because every combat, once you get past the first couple, your first combat, you're going to throw Menace on her, or Vigilance. Second combat, you're going to throw the other one. Maybe First Strike as well, but once you're past that, you're just putting counters on her. So every combat, you're putting a counter on her, and a counter on Simic Ascendancy. And as I said, there are ways to put counters on things within the deck elsewhere as well. So you go to combat, put a counter, tap 3 mana to put a counter on it from Simic Ascendancy. That's 2 counters right there. So it's a viable way to try and also have a win con within the deck other than commander damage. Also have things like Gratuitous Violence. If a creature you control would deal damage to a creature or player, it deals double that damage. I definitely want to focus on putting more damage doublers in there that only affect my board state. That's a great way, those feeding into the red side of the commander. So extra combat steps and extra damage definitely helps speeds her up. And then the rest are basically either giving her trample or trying to draw some cards to get 2 answers faster. Next up, we have Instants. There's 13 of them. Really, there's nothing crazy special about them. There's just a ton of fog spells because, like I said, while there are a decent amount of creatures, they're not a ton, not as many creatures as in most decks. So you're going to need, a lot of times she's going to be the only thing on the field, so you need ways to not take a ton of damage. And then there's card draw and ways to beef her up and give her trample within those instants. Next up, we have artifacts. 14 artifacts. The bulk of them, of course, are your mana rocks to help compensate for commander attacks when she inevitably gets blown up or exiled. But there's also things like protection to keep her from having that happen, like Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots, and then things like Trailblazer Boots to try and get her through people's defenses so you don't have to worry about them blocking. And something like Shadow Spear that can also give her lifelink, so if you got her up decent with 8, 9, 10 commander damage, you're also gaining 8, 9, 10 life, which will help keep you in the game long enough for her to finish the job. And last but not least, we have creatures. 16 of them. They kind of span the board of all kinds of different effects. We've got Aki Battle Squad, which is all about extra turns, or extra combats rather. When one or more modified creatures you control attacks, you untap it. After that's combat phase, there's an additional combat phase. You can only do that once per turn. But Me the Immortal is nothing but modified. Once you put any kind of counter on a creature, it becomes a modified creature. That would trigger Aki Battle Squad, and it's a 6/6, which is great for defending or even attacking. Spore Frog is another fog in there. Creatures that give double strike, Angrath's Marauders, which will double damage. Vorel of the Hulklade, which you can tap it to double the number of each kind of counter on target artifact, creature, or land. That's a huge one. It's only a 3-drop creature. It's a 1/4, and then you can pay a blue and a green and tap it. As soon as it doesn't have summoning sickness, boom, you double the counters on her. And because it's a tap-up, you could do it at instant speed. You can go to combat, trigger her ability, give her 1 more +1/+1 in response, pay the mana, tap Vorel to double the counters on her, and then swing. But there you go. That's the general core of Me the Immortal. All about combat damage, all about commander damage rather, all about getting those extra combat steps in and doubling the damage if possible. Again, like I said, certainly not perfect. There's a lot of weakness in the defense because, as I said, there's hardly any real answers in the deck. I kind of sacrificed those to beef up Me the Immortal. Clearly that's not going to last and not going to work long term because most decks run a ton of removal or just answers of some sort. You have to be able to respond in kind. But sometimes I just like to make a deck that's just all about punching. Who cares about I need 10 to 15 things that can exile and blow up artifacts and enchantments and creatures, and I need board wipes, and I need this. It's why? Just build your commander really strong, swing out, hopefully take it fast and win. But there you go. What would you recommend for Me the Immortal? Have you seen other people build decks, or have you built a deck like this that goes in a different direction, theme-wise? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you next time.